This is a story about Jewish mobsters in the United States, specifically focusing on figures like Meyer, Lansky, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, and their associates, who stood up against the burgeoning Nazi influence in America before and during World War II. As Europe faced the terrifying rise of fascism and anti-Semitism, these mobsters took on a dual role. They were not only pursuing their criminal enterprises, but also defending the Jewish community against Nazi sympathizers and threats. In the late 1930s, as the Nazis began their rise to power in Germany, a wave of anti-Semitic sentiment also surfaced in America. While many Americans were horrified by the reports of atrocities in Europe, there was also a disturbing rise in Nazi sympathizers and far-right groups within the US. This environment created a dangerous landscape for Jewish communities, who found themselves targeted by both overt violence and covert propaganda. Jewish mobsters, operating primarily in cities like New York and Chicago, wanted to protect their communities from growing anti-Semitic threats. They aimed to assert their power and influence in a time when Jewish people were being scapegoated and attacked. They sought to combat the propaganda and recruitment efforts of Nazi sympathizers in the US, while simultaneously maintaining their own criminal enterprises. On the other side, Nazi sympathizers, such as members of the German-American Bund, aimed to recruit and galvanize support for Hitler's regime in America. They organized rallies and distributed propaganda, attempting to normalize their hateful ideologies. This created a volatile clash of interests that the Jewish mob was all too willing to engage in. The Jewish mobsters faced significant challenges in their fight against Nazi sympathizers. Law enforcement was often uncooperative or even sympathetic to Nazi ideology. Many Americans, despite the growing evidence of Nazi atrocities, were either indifferent or swayed by the Nazi propaganda that painted Jews as the source of societal problems. Moreover, the mobsters themselves had to navigate the complexities of their criminal activities. Engaging in open violence against Nazis could attract unwanted attention from law enforcement, which was often more inclined to crack down on the mob than on the Nazi sympathizers. As a result, the mobsters had to be strategic in their approach to combating this rising threat. The Jewish mobsters took it upon themselves to confront Nazi sympathizers head-on, often with brutal results. In 1939, a significant moment came when members of the German-American Bund held a rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City. This event was meant to showcase Nazi ideology in the heart of America, but it was met with fierce resistance. Jewish gangsters organized counter-demonstrations, leading to violent clashes. One notable figure was Meyer Lansky, who, along with Bugsy Siegel, mobilized Jewish mobsters to intimidate Nazi supporters. They understood that to protect their community, they had to instill fear in those who supported the Nazi cause. This often meant using their fists, gangster style, rather than political discourse. Lansky and Siegel were known to target Nazi sympathizers directly. Reports surfaced of them confronting members of the Bund and using physical violence to disrupt their activities. The mobsters would infiltrate Bund meetings and gatherings, sometimes leading to brawls that left Nazi supporters battered and bruised. Their message was clear: the Jewish community would not stand idly by while Nazi ideology took root in America. Despite the mobsters' efforts, the influence of Nazi sympathizers was persistent. The Bund, while often ridiculed, was able to attract a significant following. The Nazis exploited economic instability and social unrest in America, framing their message in a way that appealed to those looking for a scapegoat. Many Americans, including some Jewish individuals, were hesitant to openly confront the Nazis, fearing backlash or being labeled as troublemakers. Moreover, the law enforcement response was often tepid. Police were frequently reluctant to intervene during clashes, sometimes siding with the Bund, or viewing the Jewish mobsters as just as much of a problem as the Nazis. This lack of support from the authorities created an environment where the mobsters' violent tactics could only do so much. The Jewish mobsters' fight against the Nazis was a brutal and tumultuous chapter in American history. While they succeeded in some instances in thwarting Nazi propaganda and recruitment efforts, the broader context of World War II soon shifted the focus. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States entered the war, and the fight against the Nazis became a national priority. As American soldiers began fighting on European soil, the role of Jewish mobsters evolved. They still engaged in violent confrontations with Nazi sympathizers, but also began to work more closely with law enforcement and government agencies. Their connections and knowledge of the criminal underworld became valuable in combating espionage and sabotage efforts from Nazi sympathizers in the US. The mobsters' violent resistance had a lasting impact on the Jewish community, instilling a sense of pride and resilience. They demonstrated that the community was willing to fight back against oppression, albeit through unconventional means. This legacy of resistance became part of a broader narrative about Jewish identity in America, one that combined elements of survival, strength, and defiance. The involvement of Jewish mobsters in fighting Nazi sympathizers raises complex questions about morality and justice. While their methods were often violent and criminal, they were also a reflection of a community pushed to the brink. The gangsters acted in defense of their people at a time when conventional methods of protest were inadequate against the threat posed by the Nazis. Today, historians grapple with the implications of this chapter in American history. The story of Jewish mobsters battling Nazis challenges traditional narratives of heroism and resistance. It forces us to consider how marginalized communities have historically fought back against oppression, even through methods that may seem controversial or morally ambiguous. The struggle between Jewish mobsters and Nazi sympathizers serves as a reminder that resistance takes many forms. While their approach may not align with contemporary ideals of activism, the actions of these mobsters were driven by a desperate need to protect their community in an increasingly hostile environment. Their legacy is a testament to the complexities of fighting against hate and violence, especially in a world where traditional forms of justice often fall short. While the mobsters fought valiantly against Nazi sympathizers, it's essential to highlight the broader context of Nazi atrocities occurring simultaneously. The Holocaust claimed the lives of 6 million Jews, and the brutality of the Nazi regime was unfathomable. The violent methods employed by Jewish gangsters can be juxtaposed against the calculated systemic extermination conducted by the Nazis. As Jewish mobsters battled Nazi sympathizers on American soil, the Nazis were perpetrating horrific acts of violence in Europe. The gangsters' resistance was rooted in a desperate need to protect their people from a regime that had already demonstrated a willingness to commit unimaginable atrocities. This contrast highlights the moral complexity of the mobsters' actions. In the fight against anti-Semitism, Jewish mobsters were not just defending their communities, they were also countering a regime responsible for the most heinous crimes in human history. While their tactics were often violent, they were a response to the existential threat posed by the Nazis, a reflection of a community fighting for survival in a world that had turned violently against them. The story of Jewish mobsters confronting Nazi sympathizers in America is a complex and multifaceted narrative that challenges simplistic notions of heroism and morality. These men were criminals, yes, but they were also warriors fighting against a brutal regime that sought to annihilate their people. As we reflect on this history, it is crucial to acknowledge the diversity of resistance against Nazism. The mobsters' willingness to use violence in defense of their community speaks to the desperation and determination of those living under the constant threat of persecution. Their legacy remains controversial, but it is also one of resilience, survival, and an unwavering commitment to protecting their own. The fight against Nazism was not just a battle fought on the battlefields of Europe. It was a struggle that unfolded in cities across America. Jewish mobsters, with their fists and their power, played a significant role in that fight, standing up to hate when few others would. In a world filled with gray areas, their story serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of resistance in the face of tyranny.